This is the story of a remarkable man who was born into a prosperous Welsh family in the late 1500s. After a university education, he embarked upon an almost piratical and probably dangerous time in a faraway ocean. But then he unexpectedly inherited a country estate. He became a member of Parliament, and he built a chapel that is unlike any other in Wales. When war came in the mid-1600s, he was a military commander who told the blunt truth to a king. And then he held out for 6 long months in a besieged castle that was battered by cannon fire. That man was William Salusbury, a North Wales gentleman who made quite a name for himself during his own lifetime, and who perhaps is not as well known today as his story deserves. Salusbury was officially William Salusbury of Rheg and Bachambyd. We don't know what he looked like, as no image seems to exist, but we do know what he wore because of his affectionate Welsh nickname during his lifetime. He was Hen Hosanna Gleision, Old Blue Stockings. He was born near Denbigh in 1580 into a family that had settled in a place called Llywelyn a few centuries earlier. His branch of the family also decided to spell the surname Salusbury a little differently. After finishing studies at Oriel College, Oxford, at the age of 19, he somehow ended up on a privateer ship called the bark Willoughby, which operated in the Indian Ocean. A privateer ship was in some ways just one step away from being a pirate, the difference being that the ship had government authorization to do its work, plundering and capturing enemy vessels. Why he went to sea isn't known. Perhaps it was a young man's thirst for adventure, or maybe he had a commercial involvement. When his uncle Sir Robert Salusbury died, his very large estate passed down to others, who also died in rapid succession. It landed in William's lap in 1611. He settled down, and in the years that followed married a woman called Dorothy Vaughan. Being a prosperous landowner, in 1621 he became Member of Parliament for Merioneth. He spoke in Parliament several times, and during one debate he said that he wanted to restrain the inordinate use of tobacco. He appears to have been one of the very first anti-smokers. However, with the inheritance came money problems. The properties were heavily mortgaged and there was a lot of debt. He successfully launched a legal action for fraud and deceit to recover property that had been acquired by a woman called Ellen Owen, who had been the nurse to his late Uncle Robert. And to pay off one mortgage, he arranged a completely fictitious marriage agreement between his infant son Owen and the daughter of the Bishop of St. Asaph. By this means he obtained £3,000 in a dowry, and it appears that this arrangement was beneficial not only to him, but somehow to the Bishop of St. Asaph also. Salusbury was a very religious man, and he wrote religious poetry. Some of his work still exists. The Salusburys of Llywelyn manuscript is held at the National Library of Wales. It contains work by him, by other family members in Welsh, English and Latin, and also by the very famous metaphysical poet John Donne. In 1637, William Salusbury paid for the building of the Rheg Chapel. It looks conventional enough from the outside, but inside it's very different. It's a riot of colour. It's filled with ornate painting, carvings and decorations. It's exuberant and unlike other Welsh chapels of the time, which tended to be austere. When civil war broke out in 1642, Salusbury was to prove himself a staunch royalist. Old decayed fortifications were needed again, and so he personally paid for repairs to Denbigh Castle. As a royalist lieutenant colonel, his task was to raise a regiment of 1,200 infantry from Flintshire and Merioneth. It wasn't easy to find men available to fight, and one member of the local gentry wasn't impressed with this regiment. He called them 1,200 poor Welsh vermin, the offscourings of the nation. Salusbury was involved in various clashes. His infantrymen were poorly equipped, initially at least. Some were armed only with pitchforks and scythes. They fought at the inconclusive Battle of Edgehill in October 1642. Later, Salisbury was alongside Prince Rupert, leading Welsh fighters at Brentford. But by late 1645, the Royalists were losing the war. In September, after another defeat, King Charles fled to Denbigh. He stayed for 3 or 4 days, during which he spent much time talking with Salisbury, and he evidently received very frank advice. The king later remarked, "Never did a prince hear so much truth at once." A few weeks later came a royalist defeat by Parliamentary Major General Thomas Mytton at the Battle of Denbigh Green. Many royalist soldiers retreated to the nearby castle. Mytton wasn't well equipped for a siege at that time, but he was when he returned the following April. Salisbury politely declined his offer to surrender. His reply stated that he regarded the castle as His Majesty's own house, that I will endeavour to make good for him to my last gasp. Sir Thomas Middleton, Parliament's nominal Major General for the 6 counties of North Wales, had evidently been on friendly terms with Salisbury before the war. He invited his old true friend and kinsman to deliver up that castle to me. But Salisbury held firm. The garrison of 500 was to face 6 months of siege warfare, with the stout castle walls being heavily bombarded. The Roundheads' main goal was to destroy the Goblin Tower and prevent access to a well. Conditions in the castle deteriorated. There was a drought, and then, having requested and received permission from the king, the castle was surrendered in late October. It was a very polite handover. Salisbury's message to Mytton was, "If I must quit this place, I confess I'd rather you had the honour of it than any other person in England of your party." The Royalists were able to march out of the castle with heads held high, and perhaps even with drums playing, after being granted the honours of war as a tribute by Mytton. Shortly before his execution in 1649, King Charles I sent Salisbury an embroidered cap of crimson silk as a token of his respect. Like most gentry who had picked the losing side in this conflict, Salisbury was heavily fined as a punishment, but also like many gentry after the years of Oliver Cromwell's protectorate and the restoration of the monarchy in 1660, lands and properties were recovered. He was one of 75 Welshmen nominated by King Charles II for the Order of the Royal Oak, an honour awarded for those who had supported the Royalist cause. He lived just long enough to see a king on the throne once again. Hen Hosanna Eglation, old blue stockings, lived to what was then the ripe old age of 80. He is buried in the little village of Llanannis. Described by contemporaries as an upright and honourable man, the story of William Salisbury is woven into a dramatic chapter in the history of Denbigh Castle, and also in that little chapel in Rheg, which is unlike any other in Wales.